And we're going to start with our first speaker, our keynote speaker, Bradley Schurman, and he's already in the room. Just short about him, because we want to let him speak and not us. He has been working for quite some years for AARP, the American Association for Retired Persons, with his focus on aging readiness and competitiveness. And what I liked about that is what I saw, a lot of the people who are working in this industry and working with this 50 plus generation are themselves in that age group. But Bradley must have been very young when he started working with this group. So I love to hear that story. He's the founder of the Super Age, a demographic futurist and opinion maker on things dealing with the business of longevity. And he's the author of the Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny. And I'm almost the last chapter, and it's really a great read. So if you want to learn more about what is happening in this age group, this is really, really a good book to start on. So I'm going to stop share. And Bradley, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone who's in the US, and obviously good afternoon to everyone who's in Europe. Today. It's nice to be with you. I obviously wish I could be there, that we could all be together in person. Hopefully we'll get there soon. As Ingen mentioned, obviously, I do have a long history in aging. I'm a bit of an anomaly. I got into aging when I was in my teens. I actually got into it because of my grandparents. Like most people, I had a personal connection to the space with my grandparents entering long-term care after I had entered my college years at American University in Washington, D.C. They were in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the city of my birth. But their aging experience wasn't what really got me excited. It was actually the demographic change that I witnessed on my drive between the two cities. What I found was, as I left D.C. to head home to Pittsburgh, the populations across the rural counties of central Pennsylvania will become a lot older, certainly a lot more white, more monocultural, and more than anything else, there were people that were my grandparents' age that were working. They were working in jobs that were considered quite difficult, jobs in the service industry, working at gas stations, even cleaning toilets at rest stops. And I found this to be such a conundrum because it didn't make sense to me that my grandparents could have such a comfortable retirement and these folks could be working so later in life. So I really set it as my life goal to unpack what was going on. And I found very quickly that the United States wasn't alone. In fact, the United States was a bit delayed against the backdrop of the world. Places like Japan, Germany, Italy were all well ahead of this country. And there was a lot that we could learn from them if we were to make the change that was needed for the future. I call this future that we're entering into the super age. It's the name of my book, which you can get on Amazon today if you'd like. I hope you do. But the super age is borrowed from a UN designation around populations. For those of you who don't know, the super age happens when at least 1 out of 5 people in a society are over the age of 65. Significant parts of Europe have already met this designation, but by the end of this decade, we can expect that 1 out of 5 people will be over the age of 65 in at least 35 different economies around the world. This is a novel period for human history. It's a novel period for our economies, and it's a novel period for our societies that we can either lean into and embrace the change, or we can ignore. If we choose to ignore, we can expect quite a bit of peril for our future. We can assume that a number of the things that we've become accustomed to, having a stable pension that's delivered in later life, enjoying national healthcare systems where health is provided for all, will start to become unraveled quite quickly. That's simply because our realities of the old days don't necessarily match the realities of the new days. People who are over the age of 65 present healthier now than they ever have in human history. They're healthier not only physically, but also cognitively, as well as their mental health. This group of people is more and more connected than they ever have been, both socially and economically. They're interested in work. And perhaps what makes them truly unique is that they're very interested in their well-being, both physical and mental, and they're curious. They're a curious bunch of folks. Every time human history has changed, and in fact, we can tie most of our longevity evolution to leaps in technology and science, typically around industrial revolution starting as early as 1760 in England, we can see that human life expectancy has leapt forward. Obviously, over the course of the last 100 years or so, we've gone through 3 of these industrial revolutions, starting in the 1870s. We've doubled life expectancy, as most of you know, but we've also changed the life course, perhaps fundamentally and perhaps forever. We're delaying things in our lives that we used to just follow along with. Things like getting married, things like buying a home. They're happening later and later. Having children, if people choose to have children at all, has been delayed quite significantly. In fact, in this country, the United States, the fastest growing group of young parents are actually people who are not so young. They're folks between the ages of 40 and 49. And that's a fundamental shift. But as we talk about the future and what the future means for us, inclusion becomes the central theme. The central theme about how we stick together as a people, how we keep our economies afloat, and how we make society more just and equitable than perhaps ever before in human history. But of course, in order to get to this point, we have to come together. And one of the ways that we can do that is by being more inclusive of all populations in our society. And this is not just limited to the work environment, where I'm going to talk about today. This is also extended to the built environment as well. And in fact, if I can tease something this morning, one of the companies that we've just spun off from the Super Age is a company called Kiba. Kiba is a company that is designed specifically around inclusion in the built environment, with a specific lens on aging populations. Because as we know, as we can all admit to if we're being truthful with ourselves, all of us will encounter some type of physical deficiency as we get older, and perhaps a mental deficiency as well. These things aren't necessarily bad. We've all had to wear a pair of glasses, most likely. By being inclusive of our differences, we can make a world that's actually more accommodating on the whole, and that can be used by a lot more people. Now, necessity is the mother of invention. I think if you take a look around at any business anywhere in the world, they're not doing much to be altruistic, but businesses do react to things that actually have a direct impact on their bottom line. In fact, it wasn't just until a few years ago that businesses really started waking up to climate change. Climate change now is a threat to a number of businesses around the world. Well, guess what else is a threat to businesses around the world? Demographic change. We're seeing shrinking numbers of younger people every year as birth rates continue to decline across Europe and Asia and the Americas. In fact, the only place that we're really seeing extended growth in birth rates are sub-Saharan Africa. You will find some exceptions to this rule, obviously the Philippines and Indonesia, perhaps even a handful of countries in Latin America. But on the whole, the vast number of wealthy countries in this world are seeing decreases in birth rates and increases in longevity, which means we're going to have a lot more older people and a lot fewer younger people. So in order to capture this demographic change and the opportunity that really exists for us as a people, we have to think about things differently. And in fact, I thought maybe it would make sense, if everyone's okay for me, to read a small segment of the book that talks about inclusion champions and where businesses can really step in. This is in the section of the book called The Drag of Ageism. And this is called Inclusion Champions. Executives of US companies often get a bad rap for their lack of integration of their companies with people of color, women, and LGBTQ+. And sometimes it's well-deserved. However, in the 1940s and 50s, some visionaries saw the value of racial integration, albeit from two very different perspectives: good business and good morals. The first perspective, which considers only the bottom line, is the path that organizations today must consider as they begin to compete in the super age, highlighting that the idea that fair employment is good for business and discrimination is bad for the bottom line. The deliberate exclusion of workers or consumers based on the color of their skin was irrational because it left potential profits on the table. The same holds true for discrimination based on age. In her 2009 book, Racial Integration in Corporate America, 1940 to 1990, Jennifer Delton of Skidmore College waded into the thorny issue of racial integration in the American workforce. She noted an advertising executive who defended his decision to hire a Black man in 1952 saying, and I quote, "I'm not a crusader. This is a cold, calculated move on my part for the dollar sign only. I was not pushed. I was not shoved. I was only moved by the dollar sign." Though there is some question as to whether inclusive hiring practices were profitable at that point in time, largely because they cost a lot to implement, the United States' biggest companies got behind the idea. Corporate America gave the green light to integration. The premonition of the growing importance of the African-American market and the need to hire Black men and women to help meet the needs of these consumers early in US workplace integration is backed up by statistics today. According to the Boston Consulting Group, companies with above average diversity on their management teams report revenue 19% higher and profit margins 9% higher than companies with below average diversity. What's wild is that a whopping 83% of global executives realize that an age-diverse workforce is key to business growth and success, yet only 6% have implemented non-biased recruiting policies. Smart companies are beginning to embrace generational differences as an asset and no longer see them as a liability. They are living in the reality of the super age, a time in which there will need to be more generational parity in the workplace because it already exists in society and the marketplace. Airbnb went so far as to recruit the hotel entrepreneur and modern elder, Chip Conley, out of retirement to lead the strategy that would transform it into a hospitality company. Older workers are also the secret ingredient in product and service design and development as companies begin to scramble for insights into older consumers. Integrating and leveraging diverse areas aren't happening in the United States at the same rate they are overseas, perhaps because there isn't a clear-cut mandate, or perhaps many corporate executives perceive the US workforce and economy as being relatively young and don't see the coming skills shortages. Change is coming to the United States and other nations as the proportion of older people in the workforce continues to grow. While at AARP, I had the opportunity to work with some of the world's most innovative organizations and economies on their strategies to recruit, retain, and sustain older workers. My hallmark project, AARP Best Employers International, uncovered and rewarded the best practices of organizations as small as Bremertz in Germany, which is a specialized carpentry with 25 employees, which is located in Aachen, to the National Environment Agency, a government organization in Singapore, and BT, the leading telecom provider in the United Kingdom. These organizations, as well as others, are varied in size and shape and scope, but they all agree that age-exclusive policies are bad for business, and age-inclusive ones are good for the bottom line. In some cases, such as that of German automaker BMW in 2009, the leadership realized that the company was going to face a labor shortage within a decade, due to in large part to the country's aging workforce. Rather than bury their heads in the sand, they sought their employees' counsel on how to build a more age-friendly plant in Dingolfing. They made a modest investment that made work easier and more ergonomic. The result was improved working conditions, extended working lives, and improved production quality. BMW's inclusive factory design is now a global standard being rolled out at the company's plants worldwide. And these are just a few of the examples that are outlined in the book. Perhaps what is most challenging and most interesting about the period that we're in right now is that business is starting to wake up. But are we ready to meet business with their needs right now? Over the course of the past year, at least in the United States, we've been embroiled in what's commonly referred to as the Great Resignation. This Great Resignation has on average around 4 to 4.5 million people resigning from their jobs each month. The last month that we recorded this was January of this year. So at least 9 months straight of high resignations, historic resignations across this country. The historic resignations were made possible in part, not just because of dissatisfaction amongst workers within an economy that they see as fundamentally unfair, but because employers made the faulty decision of letting too many older workers go. In fact, in the United States, we had excess retirements of up to 3 million over the course of the pandemic. Too many people are out, and very few people have been brought back in. In fact, as most people know, it is quite common as an older worker that it takes twice as long to get back into the workforce after you've left. And oftentimes you earn half as much as you did before. Companies now, because they see the loss of these workers as a clear and present threat to their bottom line, are beginning to rethink their workforce policies in earnest. In fact, just at the end of this month, I'm speaking to the top 30 human resource executives from the top 30 US companies, businesses like Walmart, McDonald's, Walgreens, all coming together to help them understand why this shift has happened and what they can do to future-proof themselves from this loss of human talent in the near future, but also in the longer term future, because they finally see the demographic change is here and it's not going away. I am really thrilled that I had a chance to be with you this morning. I'm sure that there's probably a few questions. I want to leave some time for that, if that's all right with the moderators. We can take a few now, but I appreciate you all being part of this great demographic change, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on what we can do better in the future.
Thank you, Bradley. That was very interesting, and that is also what I loved about reading your book. It's there's so much real life stories about what is happening right now, and that is, I always tell people, paint the picture, and that is what you're doing, and I love that. There is already I don't see questions yet in the chat, so please, if someone has a question, please put it in the chat. Yes, there need to be a lot of age-inclusive policies, and you're talking about these big organizations that you will be talking to next month. What would be your, very short, your top 3 advice that they should do now?
The number one thing any business can do to adapt to the modern era is to offer flexible work arrangements. This is the one thing that across the board, all employees want. Now, obviously, flexibility looks different for different people. So I think we're working towards a more dynamic, more individualized workplace where managers will be more empowered to work with their employees on their needs. So for example, if a middle-aged woman perhaps may need more time for caregiving responsibilities, perhaps of her adult parents and her children, she should get more flexibility in terms of her time at the office. Some people who have more tech-heavy jobs may be able to work from home more often. These are things that are good for us at the end of the day. Obviously, we need to let the dust settle coming out of the pandemic. We're in the middle of renegotiating the work week for a lot of brain jobs, jobs that require an office setting. But I think we're moving to a 3 to 4 day work week on average, where people will come and go out of the office on a regular clip. It won't necessarily be an 8-hour day anymore, but maybe 3 to 4 days you'll have to be in the office. The second thing is I think we have to be very deliberate of offering caregiving leave, and caregiving leave as being a universal right, not just for taking care of your adult parents, but also children, what we used to call maternal or paternal leave, but even caregiving leave for grandchildren. Both grandparents taking care of their grandchildren, which is a best practice out of Australia, Westpac Financial Group, and also grandchildren taking care of grandparents, which is a prevailing trend that's coming forward in the coming years. And this last one's the hardest one to get to. We really need to build workplaces that really value employees. I think the West, certainly the United States, got very much in the habit since the baby boom of having a disposable workplace, a disposable workforce. We had a lot of people that came into the workforce after the Second World War. They were followed by a small correction with Gen X, but then this massive expansion again with millennials. So we've been on this track of just having a lot of people. This also happened at the same time we were globalizing. So all of this essentially free labor that came out of developing countries in Asia is also starting to dry up. Behind the millennials is Gen Z. It's smaller by about, I think, 4 or 5 million people on whole, at least in this country. And behind that is Gen Alpha. And let me be clear, folks, Gen Alpha has put us in population decline for at least 7 years now. There are 7 years of contracting birth rates, at least in this country, with 2020 being our absolute lowest on record. On record. So as young people come into the workplace, we're not going to have that great push of people, that great cheap labor that we expected prior to, just as the boomers came into the workforce, rather. We're actually going to see things tighten up more and more. Now, there's a positive and a negative to this. Okay, let me be abundantly clear. The positive is this is going to be a golden age for workers. There's no doubt about that. There's no debating that. In fact, we're already starting to see the move towards economic equalization in this country, with a large number of unionizations happening in pretty rapid succession. In fact, the news this past week about Amazon employees unionizing in New York, Starbucks employees across the country is pretty shocking. But it's also something that happens when there is a tightening of the labor market. Employees have more say. But with this tightening of the labor market comes an increase in prices. We should expect that our prices will increase over time, but overall quality of life and quality of living will increase too. We should be able to start shrinking the wealth gap.
Thank you very much.